Ladies, gentlemen, and Spiritborn of all ages, are you tired of the color blue? Maybe you've enjoyed all of the evade builds and the Quill Volley setups and want to try something just a touch different, or maybe they just never were your thing in the first place. But what if I told you one of the true beauties of the whole overpower Kepaleke Ring of the Midnight Sun combo archetype is that it applies to actually quite a large number of different Spiritborn skills. My favorite of the proper core skills then has always been Crushing Hand. It was one of the skills that I messed with and heavily enjoyed even on the review build of the expansion pre-release, and I just absolutely adore this skill. This is the core skill that shoves both of your fists into the ground to create a literal Venn diagram of damage where the left circle says ouch and the right circle says ack, and if you stand in the middle you'll probably do the Wilhelm scream. Specifically, each circle does damage, and you take more if you get hit by both. Unlike Quill Volley, which gains bonus feathers for size increase as well, the interaction this skill has with Crushing Hand just does an actual size increase and makes it absolutely massive when you press the button. As well, while it is definitely weaker than Quill Volley overall, and I'll happily be the first to admit that, which is why we haven't talked about it for now until getting all the sort of meta stuff out of the way first, it is better than Quill Volley at a few other things. The first is general AoE and mob clear. Just the shape of the ability and the way that it works is better for clearing large mobs. It has a very large radius and it goes in a circle around you. Then of course also speed farming. Where Quill Volley requires a bit more build up to get running and the movement can be a bit funky sometimes, Crushing Hand does most of its damage very upfront with no regrets behind it, and with some of the pairs we're doing, this also leaps to every enemy that you particularly target, so you just destroy everything in a radius around them. Just for some fun as well, we'll also be pairing this with our triple vortex setup for tons of extra enemy pulling around and extra speed and traversal and things like that, and that lets us group things up before we do our big massive hits. By using the Vortex Runeword, the legendary aspect that attaches Vortex to Soar, and then also using the Scorn of the Earth boots, which then makes it so that you have the Runeword Vortex. Vortex is a skill on your bar that you can manually cast, and then also Vortex every time you press evade because it's Soar. As that does fit our speed farming goal, and you obviously can peel bits of this off one little bit at a time if you do want to do harder content, then, well, anything on Torment 4, because this crushes Undercity with Ancestral Tributes like it's nothing, and Torment 4 lair bosses like they are nothing as well. It basically is just pit pushing past 110 or so that you'd even need to consider swapping anything off of this setup, because you can speedrun a tier 100 in right around 3 minutes, with the Vortex grouping enemies together so you can smash them into little bits, being why I like to call this build Captain Crunch. So if that sounds like fun to you, stay tuned for the skill points and why we take them, the spirit hull choices that we take as well, the uniques that we are using, the legendaries and the affixes and gear choices as a whole, the Runewords, the gems, the mercenaries, and then also the Paragon board setup entirely. Followed finally just by a bit of how to play this setup. And of course, a quick shout out to Goblin Inc., who is the first person I've seen who found the overpower tech to begin with for the Kepaleke builds that we do actually use in this build too, which is why you see all of the orange numbers popping off. First up then, let's talk skill tree, and starting off, you don't care about the basic skill cluster, so just stick 2 points into literally anything in here to actually unlock the core skills. After that, we'll be taking all 5 ranks of Crushing Hand, as well as its enhancement, and very specifically, Rampant Crushing Hand. This makes the skill both give us Barrier for a percentage of the damage that it does, which lowers the barrier generation stat requirement for this build archetype, and lets us change up our gem slots compared to our previous Spiritborn build. Then the second enhancement makes the damage scale with your resolve stacks. And while this might surprise you, the actual wording and numbers on this tooltip do change if your maximum resolve stacks are changed as well. So if you get maximum resolve stacks on multiple pieces of gear through tempering and then masterworking, it will grow this potential multiplier, and it will grow and grow and grow the more actual maximum stacks you get, which is why mine here says that it goes up to 81% bonus damage, whereas without any tempering, I believe this is a 24% boost. So it gains an absolute ton from stacking bonus resolve stacks. That synergizes quite well with a few other things in the build too, so it is a great fun overlap that does make Crushing Hand stronger with this build. We then put 3 points into Follow Through as a passive for bonus basic skill damage that increases on your 3rd cast in a row, and this is because in our setup, Crushing Hand will count as both a core and basic skill, so it will benefit from this bonus, and we often do cast it 3 times in a row. We take 2 ranks of Vigorous over here as a passive as well for bonus resource generation after we use a core skill. Depending on your Masterworking status or the role that you have on our unique ring, you may need a 3rd skill point in this, and that's important to know, but if you want to make any of the adjustments that I mentioned like this one, you should take points out of Follow through specifically to do it, as it is our least important damage affecting passive to actually remove points from. Then we take 3 ranks of Balanced Exertion for bonus core skill damage at the cost of increased skill cost. This brings us to the Focus Cluster. Here we're going to be taking Vortex as well as its enhancement and Measured Vortex. Altogether, this gives us a nice big pull skill, which brings enemies into us and knocks them down to the ground with bonus damage if we have a barrier, which we always will. This also increases the damage of the next skill that you use after casting Vortex, which is a really fun combo with Crushing Hand, as you can actually get the full bonus on this more regularly than you might think. Especially with our setup leaning even further into Vortex than just using the skill itself, we then also pick up Ravager, as well as its enhancement and then also Measured Ravager. Altogether, this gives you a Jaguar skill that after activation applies a buff to you to add an extra hit to any attack that you do to an enemy. It increases its duration for each kill that you get while it's active too, and it also makes your core skills leap towards enemies when you cast it, and gives you extra resource generation while it's active too. All of this is really great for us for multiple reasons. It gives us speed, it gives us resource towards our requirements, it gives us some method of traversal as well, even past Soar, and it also activates a passive sort of later on in the tree quite helpfully. Speaking of passives then, we grab 1 rank of Focal Points, and this is mostly just as a gateway for 3 ranks of Apex, which is bonus damage to vulnerable enemies, doubled against elites and bosses. If you are feeling like you need more survivability than this build is offering in my current setup, either because you aren't quite there yet with your actual gear and your stats and your upgrades, or maybe you're trying to push into harder pit runs than you necessarily need to, the diminishment node here is a pretty good survivability option for passive points, giving you damage reduction from vulnerable enemies. Then we pick up 1 rank of the Mirage passive for dodge chance during evade and crit chance after we dodge. Then we also take 3 ranks of Unrestrained Power for bonus damage when we are unstoppable or unhindered. We have extremely high unstoppable uptime as a buff, so this does in fact make us pretty consistently stronger. Then we move on to the defensive cluster of skills, 3 ranks into Armored Hide to reach a specific duration and cooldown breakpoint that lets us keep it active constantly with the use of cooldown reduction from our key passive, and then we take its enhancement and also reinforced Armored Hide. Altogether, this gives you 100% bonus block chance when active, it sets your resolve to maximum stacks on activation, it gives you 400 thorns, it makes you unstoppable, and then you also get bonus blocked attack damage reduction per close enemy while this is active too. Passively, this also generates resolve stacks, but we pop this active so much that doesn't really have a big effect. Then we're going to be picking up the counterattack skill, which does not go on your actual ability bar, so don't put it on your skill bar. For whatever reason you do not activate it. The active effect of this skill gives you 100% dodge chance, and dodge chance procs before block chance does when an enemy hits you, which means while this is active, you cannot physically activate block, and blocking is actually a big damage increase for us from a specific legendary aspect, so you don't want to use the active on this skill. Instead, enjoy the passive effect of retaliating hits when you dodge. The enhancement won't affect us, but reinforced counterattack is the real reason that we get this, honestly, as it gives us just a permanent crit damage multiplier for each enemy that is close to us, which is of course fantastic. We keep this active because our unique ring gives us the passive effects from counterattack for free. We then also pick up Scourge as a skill, its enhancement, as well as Adaptive Scourge. Altogether, this gives us a pop of poison damage in a radius around us, as well as applying slow and fear as crowd control to all enemies within. This also increases your crowd controlled enemy damage for each tick of damage that it does, up to 50% damage bonus at maximum stacks. You can refresh this bonus if you cast the skill again before its duration ends, and of course if you hit an enemy with it, which lets you hit full stacks even on bosses. As well, we get a 35% lucky hit chance against any enemy affected by the skill to lifesteal for 35% of the damage done of any given hit. This is a ton of life given our damage compared to our actual health pool, so this regens us like crazy. We're then going to be picking up some passives here as well, 1 rank of Endurance just for a little bit of actual bonus vigor when we cast defensive skills, but mostly this is just a gateway to 3 ranks of the Perseverance passive for bonus damage reduction for each resolve stack that you have. Because we stack maximum resolve stacks on our gear as one of our main goals, this actually has a massive effect on us defensively as well as a result. In this cluster, you also have a couple of other optional ways to differ from my personal skill tree and move points around if you'd like to. Patient Guard over here gives you 10% block chance and only takes 1 skill rank for that main value, which does not increase if you add more points into the skill. Block chance turns into crit damage within our build, so this is a slight bit of potential bonus damage. But then there is also Anti-Venom. This build doesn't naturally build for resistance caps on Torment 4 because it simply does not need them. We achieve such ridiculous tankiness that in none of my background footage do I have max resistances, and I am in no danger at all. That said, until your stats are where mine are, you may want these resistances capped, and we'll talk talk about an easy way to do that with your gear later on to adjust it. But if you'd like to do a sort of half measure, then anti-venom ranks can increase your poison resistance at the very least, as well as maximum poison resistance, and it increases it quite a large amount for each rank, relatively speaking, compared to most passives. Then we move on to our next cluster, the potency cluster, and in here we'll be taking entirely purely passives. First, 3 ranks of resilient for bonus maximum health after using a gorilla skill, and this translates into pure damage as well due to a specific bug going on with our Paragon board. 3 ranks of the brilliance passive for bonus damage with eagle skills for a percentage of our movement speed, and yeah, before you ask, our setup does make crushing hand count as an eagle skill. We then take 3 ranks of the potent passive here for a stacking debuff on enemies that increases our damage to them each time they are hit by a jaguar skill. This is applied by the damage of Ravager, by the damage of counterattack, and by using any of our skills actually, as we also just have the jaguar skill tag added onto all skills to make this more consistent. We also then take 3 ranks of the furnace passive for bonus critical damage to jaguar skills per rank of ferocity that you have. In the ultimate cluster, we're going to be taking the hunter ultimate as well as its enhancements, and altogether what this gives us is an 8-second buff for bonus damage to injured enemies after we cast it. It overfills our ferocity stacks by 4, which makes us have a higher maximum than we otherwise could, and is our main way of gaining ferocity in itself, for both bonus attack speed and crit damage within the build. Then this ult also has a chance to reset itself if you get a kill while it's active, which also works beautifully with our passives here. 3 ranks of resolution for bonus damage to elites after casting an ultimate, which we reactivate each time the hunter lets us use it again. 3 ranks of spiritual attunement for 30 maximum resource as a bonus, which importantly both helps us reach our required amount for overpowers, and just increases our damage output in general too, as maximum resource does with a Kepaleke build. Then we also take 3 ranks of supremacy. This gives you a stacking buff for every kill that you get while an ultimate skill is active, and you get 5 stacks automatically when an ultimate skill ends, at which point the amount starts to actually depreciate. Because the hunter resets frequently and has a short duration, we take advantage of the 5 bonus stacks on ultimate end and just use it repeatedly when off cooldown to maintain stacks of this passive skill as high as we can. Then our final skill point is of course going to be for our key passive, which is for this going to be, as usual, Prodigy's Tempo. Because our unique weapon makes Crushing Hand count as both a basic and core skill, this means every 3rd cast in a row of Crushing Hand will both increase all of our skill ranks by 2 and reduce all of our active cooldowns, making this just an incredibly, just absolute perfect combo with this type of build. Then after that, we move on to our Spirit Hall choices because the skill tree is done. For your primary Spirit Hall choice, we're going with Jaguar. This gives you a bonus pop of damage after every 15th time you deal direct damage with a Jaguar skill. All of our skills are direct damage, and they all count as Jaguar because we have the Spirit Hall choice, which also gives the Jaguar skill tag to all skills. This will do a portion of the damage that you've dealt in the last half second whenever it procs, and this does stack to be quite powerful. Our secondary Spirit Hall bonus is going to be Eagle. This actually doesn't give us much of anything at all because we have guaranteed crits, but the main thing that applies to us is because of one of our uniques. This also makes it apply the Eagle skill tag to our actual skills, and that's important for triggering things like the Brilliance passive or one of our Paragon glyph choices, which is specifically for Eagle skills. Then moving on from that, we have our gear. Starting with uniques, there are various technical versions of this that you can run with similar potential results, but this is the one that requires 0 mythic uniques, which is sort of a cool bonus for it as well. And I know that you keep just asking for strong builds that don't use any mythics, so here is one fantastic example. Our main important unique for this then is the Rod of Kepaleke. This makes your core skills count as basic skills too. It makes them not cost resource by default unless you reach maximum resource, and then you dump it all at once to do a bunch of bonus damage and crit damage per resource spent while doing so. Your main goals when picking between different Kepalekes for this build are the 3% roll on the weapon effect itself and the maximum resource affix as well. Both of these increase your damage by a massive amount, and the chance to hit twice affix is the next most important because it actually does work for Crushing Hand as opposed to Quill Volley where it doesn't really affect it. The weapon effect itself, when at 3%, is very literally an extra 3% bonus crit damage multiplier for every resource spent, so maximum resource increases this bonus by a further 3% for every point of resource that we add on top of our base. Obviously, rolls lower than 3% on this weapon will make it just scale far less because of that concept, so those are your ideal maximum stats on this item. Then second up, we have the second most important piece of the puzzle, which is the Banished Lord's Talisman. Every time that you spend 275 resource, your next core skill is guaranteed to overpower. This also increases the damage of attacks that do both crit and overpower simultaneously, so Kepaleke makes us do guaranteed crits. Our maximum resource increases are how we reach the required point to make every cast also also be an overpower with crushing hands, which makes it do both of these things guaranteed. Specifically with this, you need to reach around 246 maximum resource, because for whatever reason, the amulet takes into account the base cost of crushing hands, even though Kepaleke makes it technically cost 0 when we use it. So in reality, Banished Lords calculates off of your maximum resource plus the base resource cost of the skill for this build archetype. As for how to reach 246 maximum resource then, 100 is your base maximum resource, we get 130 with passives added in, we get around 94 bonus resource from Paragon points, which instantly would put us up to 224 max resource. But keep in mind that that is with a level 100 Paragon glyph, though you can still reach about 85 with this from a more reasonable upgrade level point. So let's say 85 from Paragon just for the sake of this, and instead we'll have our max total here be 215. The weapon itself has a guaranteed maximum resource roll on it, and just to show how approachable this actually is to reach, a high roll of maximum resource on the weapon without a greater affix is still 24 bonus maximum resource, which would put us at 239. Then Masterworking with even one proc hit would then instantly put us above our threshold of 246, not to mention greater affixes, Masterworking with multiple proc hits, or of course the Elixir of Resourcefulness, which exists and is ideal for this build anyways because it just further increases our damage, because it just increases your maximum resource and also gives you resource cost reduction, which does actually technically increase the damage done with the way that Kepaleke works. Not to mention, you do just want to stack maximum resource even past the threshold because again, every point of maximum resource is more crit damage multiplier gained from the Kepaleke effect. For example, the Spiritborn who cleared a tier 150 pit first had like 11,000% crit damage on their stat sheet, and this is a good reason why. So, you know, it's a pretty strong thing to focus on. On the Banished Lord's talisman itself then, you want to prioritize maximum life percentage as a greater affix and Masterworking, as well as the unique effect itself too of the item. I'd rather have a high unique effect roll than like a 40% with max life greater affix, but obviously the ideal is to have both of them. Then past that, both the core skill rank increase and attack speed are incredibly strong too for this build. Our third most important unique, and also a very required one, is the Ring of the Midnight Sun. This gives resource refunded whenever you crit, up to 50% of the resource that you've spent over the last 2 seconds. The most important stat by a mile on this item is the unique effect itself. 50% is unbelievably important for our consistency, as the resource refund is what allows us to maintain spending our full max resource with every cast. This is what lets us proc Kepaleke properly, as well as Banished Lords, with every single hit. The stats on this are fine, with crit damage and damage to elites being the priorities for your upgrades. Cooldown reduction is also pretty good, but the unique effect is by far the most important part of this item, to the point that my ring isn't even an ancestral, and it's better than any of the ancestral versions of this that I've had drop, because again, it's the effect that matters most. Next up, we have the Harmony of Ebewaka helmet. This gives us all stats to help with Paragon, it gives flat damage reduction, it gives movement speed, and the unique effect itself is super important too. Not only do you get up to 30% bonus damage per Guardian Spirit tag on a skill, so it's 90% bonus within our setup, which is a massive multiplier from a helmet, and again, like our ring, the unique effect roll itself is the most important part of this item. Then it also adds your secondary Spirit Hall choice tag to your skills, just like your primary, which is what makes this effect so strong, not to mention that it also makes them count for both passive skill and Paragon upgrades of the other skill type, which is why we have passives that affect both Jaguar and Eagle skills, despite our main damage source being a base Gorilla skill, because it technically counts as all 3 thanks to this helmet and our Spirit Hall choices. Then our final unique is going to be the Scorn of the Earth boots. This actually does have some variants. These are the boots to replace your evade with Soar. This enables part of our ridiculous amount of vortexes that we use that combo together and such like that. It's super useful for that exact purpose, and the main important stats on this are the movement speed itself, and then actually it will be the barrier granted by Soar, but specifically after Thursday when patch 2.0.3 hits, because this stat currently does not increase with either greater affixes or Masterworking, but will be fixed to do so in this update. If you want to pit push instead and do harder content, this is the easiest place to fill in our gap of resistances then, as you can use something like Rakanath's Wake or Yen's Blessing in the boot slot for just a ton of bonus all resist, and these are quite common, or even honestly just legendary boots with an all element resistance roll would do most of the heavy lifting that you need. Then you can put something like the Duelist aspect on that for bonus maximum ferocity stacks, which would increase both our attack speed and crit damage too. For our remaining item pieces then, on our ring we have the Moonrise aspect for bonus attack speed and basic skill damage. The ideal affixes on your ring are max life, attack speed, and lucky hit chance to make enemies enemies vulnerable, because this is our main source of vulnerable application within the build. Attack speed is your main focus of the three for greater affix getting and masterworking procs. Maximum life is your secondary priority. For tempering here, you want resource generation to help our full resource gen combos, and then overpower damage is the highest additive bonus you can get from an offensive temper that applies to our general attacks. On our gloves then, we have the redirected force aspect, which increases our critical damage by a percentage of our block chance. While this is generally intended to be capped because you can't technically have more than 100% block chance, well, in actuality, you can have more than 100%, because different sources of block chance stack separately. You have base block chance for using a quarterstaff, you have block chance that you can gain through Paragon or skill tree or even other aspects, and then you have plus 100% block chance while Armored Hide is active, which easily puts you over 100% total block chance, but still increases your crit damage through this aspect. For the affixes themselves then, on the actual item, you want maximum life, attack speed, and ranks of crushing hand, at least ideally. Right now I reach armor cap by using incense before doing anything challenging, and 700 armor is honestly fine for most Torment 4 content in this build, even without the incenses. But in earlier stages of the build where you have less survivability or worse stats, you might want an armor roll on your gloves instead of attack speed specifically to help you get to a point of stability. Crushing hand ranks then are the priority, the highest one for the actual greater affixes and masterworking, followed closely by attack speed. For tempers, mine are all out of whack for this, honestly, but the ideal two would be overpower damage once again, and then vortex size increase. One roll of this will get you most of the way to maximum size for vortex once you masterwork the rest of the item, and this makes it pretty large and draws enemies in from quite far away, which makes our vortex combo even better. Then we have our pants, and on these we have the interdiction aspect. This is once more another source of bonus block chance, increasing block chance for each resolve stack that you have. Here, our maximum resolve stacking comes into play once more, as bonus maximum resolve means more block chance from this aspect, which means more crit damage from the redirected force aspect. And as usual, it's worth mentioning that both my redirected force aspect and my interdiction aspect are relatively far from a maximum roll, so the damage of this build has a lot of potential to be honestly a lot higher than mine is if you're just luckier than me. As for the affixes then, max life, armor, and basic skill ranks are your ideal three, with the greater affix priority being basic skill ranks above maximum life, and then third, armor. For tempering, you very importantly want bonus maximum resolve stacks, and then barrier generation. You want every masterworking proc possible on bonus maximum resolve stacks, as this actually is what scales our damage to an insane degree, and also boosts our survivability a bit too. This gives you up to 13 bonus ranks at proper full masterworking procs, which is sort of insane. Then we have our chest piece for this too, for which we have the aspect of turbulence, which makes our Soar cast vortex before you land. If you are doing the swap that I mentioned earlier of removing the Scorn of the Earth unique boots for resistance reasons, you would also want to swap this out of an aspect, of course, as Soar casting Vortex would mean nothing if we aren't using Soar. That said, the ideal affixes on here are max life, armor, and all element resist. This armor slot does a lot of the heavy lifting towards our defensive caps in the build really, and then for tempering, you want exactly the same as the pants, barrier generation and maximum resolve stacks, and the bonus procs for masterworking should all hit on resolve stacks again ideally if you can. For Runewords and gems within your equipment then, you want diamonds in your jewelry unless you are doing the boot swap that we mentioned for all resist, in which case you can work in some skulls to shore up your armor cap as well, just for pure safety if you really need it, but again, you don't need that in this build. For armor slots, you want specifically 1 or 2 amethysts for barrier generation. Your goal is to hit somewhere around 65% barrier generation, which you can look at in your stat sheet, for consistent creation of 100% maximum life as barrier with this setup. So whatever amount you find you need to hit that mark in your stat screen, on top of our armor and Paragon choices being worked in here too. Then you can use emeralds in the rest of your armor slots for bonus dexterity gain. For Runewords, you want percent of maximum resource spent and also the Earthen Bulwark rune. This makes it so every time that we spend 300% of our maximum resource, we cast Earthen Bulwark. So every 3 casts of Crushing Hand within our setup, we get a big meaty barrier. Our second rune word is the combination of Offering for invoking another class's skill, and the invocation of Vortex for our third method of casting Vortex. This triggers every 2 times that we activate Earthen Bulwark, which is the equivalent of every 6 casts of Crushing Hand. This is fantastic for things like Infernal Hordes or Helltide, or even just Pit, honestly. If you're not pushing Pit but speed farming, it helps you just group up enemies and smash them really quickly. So you can zoom around the actual zone that you're in, whichever activity you're doing, using Crushing Hand to leap from each individual enemy to another, or soar, or whatever you want to use, and then you pull everything in from out of your range in closer to get crunched by the Crushing Hand as well. If you are trying to push hard content above your pay grade, instead of just speed farming, you can always trade this out for the rune that increases your maximum life instead, as that both adds tankiness and also a fair bit of damage to us through a bugged Paragon node that we will be talking about momentarily. But first, let's talk about your mercenary choices. Your main mercenary for this should be right here, and which side you bring him down mostly depends on your personal stat spread. You can go down the right side like I do here for the all element resistance and the extra damage multipliers related to the active skills as well, and this is important if you're missing resistances more than armor. Again, we're fine with our actual survivability, but this just helps make it a little bit safer so you don't have to be completely spamming abilities to survive, as the main way that we do survivability is through pure ridiculous barrier generation. If you do hit your resistances for whatever reason, maybe you do the boot swap we talked about earlier, you can instead go down the left side with Rahir through the bonus armor node, which is very good for helping us reach the cap, but also just a much more consistent damage multiplier than having to stand in specific areas, which is the multipliers that you get from the right side tree. Then secondarily, for your reinforcement, we take Variana with Bloodthirst for the attack speed that you gain when she activates the skill. Finally then, let's talk about our Paragon board setup for today, and like our gear, this is actually relatively similar to the Quill Volley setup, just with some minimal changes, and the general basis of the build is extremely similar, honestly, just focused around Crushing Hand instead of Quill Volley, and making the changes necessary to make sense given that swap. As well, noting before we enter here properly, with the new Paragon system this season, it is hard to expect anyone to be on the same Paragon level as anyone else. So if you have less points than I do, your main focus is to hit the Paragon glyphs and activation requirements, and then the legendary nodes for each board that I take you through here. The rare nodes are the most important if you have more points after that, and then filling in extra bonus stats into various glyph radiuses. If you have more Paragon points than I do, at the end, I'll briefly explain how I would spend those too. That said, on our starting board, we go right up to the glyph socket itself, and here we're going to be sticking in the Colossal glyph. What this does is increase your damage with Gorilla skills, which obviously does affect us. The additional bonus, though, is an extra multiplicative damage boost for every stack of resolve you have, and this does of course increase with maximum resolve stacks, so we stack ridiculous amounts of resolve stacks, and this gives us just an insane multiplier to our damage as a result of doing this. As well, the legendary bonus is bonus damage to close enemies. All enemies will be close while we're fighting them, and if they aren't, we'll be jumping directly on top of them and making them close. Then you take the actual stats within the radius to activate this, as well as the rare and magic nodes of actual relevance too, before exiting out the top side of the board to attach on the Viscous Shield board. Here we go up the left side for the damage reduction while you have a barrier, rare and magic nodes, as those are quite important, and then we go up to the legendary skill itself, which is going to be Viscous Shield, and this is just incredibly bugged right now. So the way that this reads and the way it's supposed to work is that it gives you 1% increased damage for every 3% of your maximum life that you have as a barrier. If this did what it was saying, if you had 100% of your life as a barrier, it would give you 33.3% increased damage, simple as that. However, that's not exactly how it works, because instead of focusing on your maximum life, what this works off of is your base life. Base life at level 60 is somewhere around 400, so if you get a bunch of maximum life increases from your gear or from other places, you can get up to 8,000 or higher maximum life, but let's just use 8,000 as a bracket because that's right around where I'm sitting. With 8,000 maximum life, what this will actually do is count you as having 2,000% of your maximum life as barrier, which means that you get about 666.6% damage increase from this node, instead of a 33.3%, so 33% up to 666%. So this is a very big bug, and it makes pretty much every Spiritborn build that exists do way more damage than it probably should be until it gets fixed. But it's a thing that exists, so we should use it while it's here. Then we also grab the increased armor and maximum life rare magic nodes up here, before dropping off to the actual glyph socket itself on the board, inside of which we put in the outmatch glyph. What this does is increase the effectiveness of the rare nodes in range, which is important because these are very good ones for additive crit damage and dexterity, as well as again bonus damage while you have a barrier, which is quite strong because again we'll always have the barrier. The multiplicative effect of this though is increased physical damage to non-elites and bosses, so it's quite useful, and the legendary bonus is increased damage while healthy, and because of the way our barrier shenanigans work, we should always be above 80% health and always get this bonus. We then grab the actual stats within the radius to activate this. You don't want to overfill this one because you don't get any bonuses for doing so. And then we head out of the right side of the board here. We'll be attaching on the sapping board like so. We go over right directly to the legendary node itself after making a brief stop in the resistance to all elements rare node, and also the resource generation and bonus maximum resource rare and magic nodes too. We go over to the sapping node itself there, which makes it so when you cast 3 skills of the same base spirit in a row, you restore 15% of your resource and also deal 30% increased damage for 5 seconds. We will constantly be doing this because we cast Crushing Hand just on repeat, aside from our cooldowns of course, and this means that we will permanently have this 30% damage multiplier active. After this, we head down to the actual glyph socket itself, of course making a stop for the all element resist and also the attack speed, rare and magic nodes that are on the way, and in this socket we'll be sticking in the Menagerist glyph. This gives you a bonus to all magic nodes within the radius, which is quite hefty, and this is our most important glyph for upgrading. If you're upgrading your glyphs, this is your top priority. The reason why is the magic nodes that is actually buffing are maximum resource. All of this bonus maximum resource is extremely important for giving us more damage, helping us reach our overpower threshold. It's just very, very strong. Then we grab the other rare magic nodes in the radius, we grab what we need to activate the effect itself too of the glyph, which is bonus damage in general. If you use one skill from each spirit within 10 seconds, it stacks together to give you 16% multiplicative damage. It also has a legendary effect of increasing incarnate skill damage, but that doesn't really do anything for us. We entirely use this for the other 2 bonuses because they are both very, very strong, especially in this slot. Then after that, we're going to be moving back to the Viscous Shield board actually, and heading out of the top side, where we're going to attach the Revealing board like so. We go left to the actual legendary node itself, making a stop at the maximum life and armor rare node here as well for the magic nodes beside it too, and then we pick up the legendary node here. This gives you a lucky hit chance to knock down vulnerable enemies and increases the damage that you deal to crowd controlled targets too. Then this is sort of a later stage if you have extra points like I do. We do go up here to pick up the extra attack speed, rare and magic nodes here, as well as a little bit of extra armor to help us get a bit closer to our cap too. Then you go back over to the sapping board, and this time we head out the top side here, where we'll be detaching on the Infighter board. Here you want to go through the rare and magic, maximum life and resistance increased nodes, and then curve over to the node itself for the legendary. This makes it so when you block an attack or dodge one, you will gain 2% increased attack speed and 1% increased damage for 5 seconds, stacking up to 9 times. At full stacks, this gives you 18% attack speed and 9% damage, which is a pretty good result. What this does mostly is replace Convergence, which we used in the other build, because Convergence requires you to build specific damage types, and you can't really build the stat for physical damage. It's not really a thing that you can do easily in the game. It's a lot easier to build elemental damages, and because Crushing Hand is physical damage, it would just be a waste to do that, so we use this instead. As well, this lets us get the block chance rare magic node in the middle, and block chance turns into crit damage, so it is still pretty good to have. Not to mention, the attack speed, very good too. Then we go to the glyph socket itself for the board, inside of which we put the Spirit glyph, which is one of our most important ones. This increases your crit damage for every bit of dexterity in the range. This gives you an additional bonus that puts a debuff on an enemy every time you crit them, which increases all damage that you do to them after the fact. We also grab the rare and magic nodes of relevance within the range, as well as the dexterity to activate it. We have a little bit more dexterity than we need, but that's good because again, that gives us more crit damage. We go over to the left side here and reattach over to the Revealing board in a way that saves us some points and lets us go over to the glyph socket through the top side. Here inside of this glyph socket, we'll be sticking the Talon glyph. This increases your damage with eagle skills, which does apply to Crushing Hand because of the Harmony of Ebawaka helmet. The additional bonus also gives you increased critical damage with eagle skills, which again does apply and is a very strong bonus. The multiplier doesn't affect us here because it only affects lightning damage, but the rest of this is so good that it's worth using regardless. So we take the actual rare and magic nodes in the radius, we take the dexterity to activate it, and then the extra bonus points that I have here are just that, they are bonus points. If you have more Paragon points than me, then the most important things for you to do first are the bonus armor and resistance nodes that are available on the board close to the points that I've spent, but I haven't done because I just don't have the space. Once you've gotten those, your main sort of bonuses are things like the magic nodes that are very close to bonus vulnerable damage, bonus damage in general. There's some bonus crowd control damage in other places like this as well, and these are good additive bonuses to have. Past that, your highest priority is simply adding more stats to the radius of your important glyphs, with the priority of these being the Talon glyph for bonus eagle skill damage, because again, that applies to our gorilla skill, the Colossal glyph for bonus gorilla skill damage, because we're using gorilla skills, and then third priority for adding more stats into the radius of is Spirit. This one gives you the most actual amount of stat per point added, but because we have so much additive crit damage, it actually doesn't add too much once you reach a certain point. It's still good, it's still worth getting, it's just lower priority than those other two. And that does it for the Paragon board then, so now let's just talk about simply how to play the build. Use Scourge, Armored Hide, the Hunter, and Vortex on cooldown. Use Ravager as frequently as you need to keep the effect active, and you can see this with the green bar that is on the skill. Aside from that, you want to use Crushing Hand on repeat. If you cast it 3 times in a row, you get bonus skill ranks and cooldown reduction, which then enables you to use your other skills again faster as well. This is the main loop of the build. It's relatively simple, and it's far more comfortable than Quill Volley to actually run in my opinion, because it's not projectile based and it hits in a full radius around you, as well as having a lot more of the actual damage be upfront loaded in the skill itself rather than requiring the same level of buildup that Quill Volley sort of does. Sure, the actual top end that this can reach is lower than Quill Volley, but unless your goal this season is beating a tier 150 pit, you just don't really need to use the literal best Spiritborn build for damage unless you want to. Instead, you can do things that are a little bit less pure DPS but better for other reasons, such as the comfort mentioned, or just the fun of using a big smashy gorilla skill, which is my favorite part of it personally. I mean, the Gorilla Guardian is literally called Wumbo. What's not to love about that? That does it for today then, everyone. The Captain Crunch Crush in Hands triple Vortex build. I hope you've all enjoyed this, and I hope you enjoy using it for yourself in game too, if you choose to check it out. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.